ahead and do that. All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're excited to be here and excited to talk about one of our greatest passions, urban planning. So this is the second webinar in this series, and I hope to do many more with different speakers from different backgrounds. After the last one of the attendees actually reached out to me and said that the webinar helped to cement his decision in applying for a school for urban planning, and he has since been accepted to 2 schools. That's amazing. I don't know if he's on here right now, but congratulations. That is absolutely the intention of this webinar, and I hope everyone here will find this just as valuable as well. So the first half of this webinar, I'll be asking the questions to the speakers regarding careers, education, and overall experience in the planning industry. Afterwards, we'll open up the floor to Q&A from the audience. Just a friendly reminder, keep the questions in the Q&A box down below. And there's also a chat box where you can include any other comments as well. I know last time people included in the comments where they're from or who they are. I'd love to, if you guys could write that in as well. We really love getting to know the audience. So let us know where you're from. So before we get started, I also want to do a land acknowledgement. I'm not sure how many of you have heard of this before or know what it is, and I recognize that this is an international webinar. For today's sake, I will recite Toronto's land acknowledgement, mainly because I'm from Toronto, but I'll explain more about what it is after. We acknowledge that the land we're meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. So for those who don't know, the point of a land acknowledgement isn't just to make a statement. It's an opportunity for us to reflect on and give thanks to the history and the people that walked on this land before us. This is an Indigenous tradition that we hope to continue. And in Canada, you'll often hear a land acknowledgement at the beginning of an event like this, or even in public community meetings. It's one of the many steps we are taking towards the reconciliation process, and I hope this encourages you to look up the land acknowledgements for your local area and to learn about the history of the Indigenous groups that lived there before you. It's important because as future planners and being the next generation of people that will be transforming our cities, it's important that we recognize and appreciate the history and the people as well. Okay, so with that, let's go ahead and get started. Before I get into my questions, I'm going to get our amazing speakers to introduce themselves first. I'll pick on you first, Senator Lee. Before you start though, just to kind of give everyone a background, I know Senator Lee doesn't necessarily come from a planning background. I invited him today because I think that he'll provide valuable insight regarding policy, and oftentimes whether you're an experienced planner or new to planning, you'll find that policy and planning often butt head to head. So I believe the senator will provide some good insight on that. Senator Lee, please go ahead and get started on your introduction.
Thanks very much. My name is Chris Lee. I'm a state senator in Hawaii, out in the middle of the Pacific, and I was elected in 2008. So I've been in elected office for just over a decade now. Also, I'm for some reason suffering from either a cold or who knows what. So if I sound like I'm about to keel over, I promise it's not COVID and you won't be getting it. But for the past decade or so, I've started to focus in my official role on planning policy, development, and all the transit related things that are going on in our state. So have played an increasing role in trying to direct some of that. I do have a background from Oregon State University, where I originally started in architecture, and then switched over to politics, which is a long story, but basically it was the fastest way out of college at that point. But fell in love with change and getting things done. So ended up doing what I'm doing now. And thanks for having me.
Wonderful. Chris, can you go next?
Sure. Thanks, Kimberly. My name is Chris Drew, and I'm a land use planner with Divine Park LLP, and we're a law firm that represents property developers and landowners. And I'm speaking from downtown Toronto from my very empty office. And I went to Ryerson, graduated in 2009 with a Bachelor of Urban Regional Planning, and I'm very passionate about transit. And you can see some examples in the background of some paper transit vehicles and cycling. And it's just a pleasure to be here and happy to take your questions.
Sean, please go ahead.
I'm Sean Galbraith. I'm an urban planning consultant here in Toronto. I've been a planner for 22 years, including a 6-year stint in Florida, which I've recovered from. I largely help small developers and homeowners try and get projects through the city's Byzantine application and approvals process. And I also make custom bow ties like this official plan one that I'm wearing.
Andre, please go ahead.
Hi, thank you very much for having me. My name is Andre. I'm from Brazil. I'm an architect from Brazil, also urban planner, but actually I live in Barcelona for the past 6 years and working in a urban planning company, but I'm working more as a data scientist. Is a company that mixes data science and data management and data analysis to urban planning and to urban management. So between data, tables, Excel, and urban planning.
Thank you. Daisy, please go ahead.
I'm Daisy Goebel. I'm here in rural Oregon, in rural Eastern Oregon. I've lived in Oregon my whole life. I went to the University of Oregon for college. And I initially so my degree is in planning, public policy, and management. And I initially decided to pursue that major after getting into real estate. So I was a realtor in college, working my way through. And so as I was doing this public policy degree, I actually just realized the importance and the significance of urban planning, and decided to pursue that track rather than the public policy track. And so I've been since then working as a planner in John Day, Oregon. And I'm the only planner in the city, so I report directly to the city manager, and it's been just a really awesome experience working for a real small shop.
Amazing. And Jade.
Hey everyone, I'm Jade and I'm from Ireland, and I'm in my final week of my Masters in Regional and Urban Planning from University College Dublin. And I graduated from an undergrad in social science, also from UCD in 2019, and went straight into my current Masters, which is 2 years full-time. So I'll be graduating this summer, hopefully. So just 2 weeks ago, I started my grad job in the private sector as a graduate planner at a planning consultancy firm in Dublin as well.
Congrats on the new job. All right, let's start with Chris. Drew, what got you into planning? Why urban planning?
Well, I grew up in the suburbs of Toronto, and I think when I was always coming into Toronto with my parents, I was just so excited by the scale and the activity, and there just seemed to be so much action. And so that, from a very young age, drew me to thinking about cities and planning. But the other thing was I had parents, and particularly my dad, who enjoyed taking my brother and I train watching, and always took us on transit. And so again, you can see behind me some examples of that because I'm a big geek, and I even took the GO train to my wedding. But it was very organic. And then basically in high school, probably from grade 9, I knew that Ryerson existed. I knew that urban planning existed. And I said, I want to be in this. I want to do this. This seems really exciting, and it's been a wonderful journey.
Fantastic. I did see in the chat box, someone asked me if I could introduce myself. I'm sorry I didn't before. I am a prospective master's student that will be attending Ryerson University in Toronto. I started this webinar just out of passion. I wanted to help other aspiring planners, just like many of you. And this is what I have today. It's a great chance to meet urban planners, and you're doing the right thing by taking the initiative to learn through webinars like this. So Sean, can you tell me why you got into planning, and 2, what is your day-to-day job like?
So I took in high school an urban studies class, and I've always been a map geek. You know, in my bedroom growing up as a kid, I had National Geographic maps like plastered on the walls, and I love looking and, you know, seeing all the places of the world. And so urban studies really caught my attention. And a week before university admissions were due, I still didn't really know what I wanted to do. And so I went to the guidance counselor and I said, guide me. And he said, what did you like? I'm like, urban studies. He's like, flip, flip, flip. How about urban and regional planning? Like, yeah, that sounds cool. And so that's why I'm a planner today. It also had no math prerequisite, which was pretty awesome and helpful because I'm not very good at math. I loved it. So I went to the University of Waterloo and I got my undergraduate degree from there. I live next door to Ryerson though, so you know it's okay for this crowd. So I got a 4-year degree from Waterloo, and after university, I went down to Florida for 6 years to work as a private sector planner, and I've been, with the exception of 2 years at the province, I've been a private sector planner for my entire 22.5-year career.
Okay. Daisy, what's your day-to-day job like?
So my day-to-day job, because like I mentioned before, I work for a very small office and I'm formally the only planner, even though the city manager has some experience in urban planning for guidance. But I do basically everything from writing staff reports for the planning commission to doing like code revisions to like working with like residents that are just wondering about the process. And then I also do all of the type 1 and 2 administrative work. So making planning decisions. So like, honestly, it's a very broad and a lot of things. I get to do some really big and interesting projects. Right now we're working on redoing the like signage in town. I think I would probably go on too long to tell you everything that I do, but I really love working for a very small town and in a small office because I get to do everything from like the most mundane, like putting stamps on envelopes, to the most like exciting and like really kind of revolutionary projects that are really like changing and designing what we want our city to look like, and working one-on-one with residents to just shape that vision and define that vision, and then just really make it happen and actually put like steel in the ground. So seeing projects through from beginning to end is a really big part of it. But I'd say that my job is very broad just because of that.
Sounds great. Jade just started a new position. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, sure. So right now I'm working from home, like most people right now. So I just log into my screen. It's in a private developing consultancy agency. So we work in securing planning permission for development projects, mostly quite high density housing projects in and around Dublin, as Ireland has been experiencing a housing crisis for a couple of years now. So my daily duties are usually between researching an area and the local planning objectives for a project and outlining the rationale behind a development, in report writing and submitting to the council for planning permission. So it's a lot of research.
Okay, great. Andre, when we spoke, you were working, or you told me about a project that you were working on. It's in partnership with the city in Barcelona. Can you tell us more about that project?
Yeah, so actually, I work for a company called 300,000 kilometers per second here in Barcelona. It's an urban planning company that works mainly with big data and data analysis. So actually what we do is to give some basis to the decision makers here in Barcelona. So when there is a need to change up some part of the plan of the city, as we work in a pretty old city, you know, like here in the old town, for example, where we did the last plan, it's like a town from 300 years. So when there's a need to change something in the planning, or to change something in the commercial licenses planning, some kind of change in the planning, so we give them the subject for them to study, for them to understand what do they need to do with it, using the data and using all this part of data analysis.
Okay, great. How is the job market going in your sector, in your area? I'm going to ask Chris to talk about how's the job market for Toronto or the GTA for urban planners.
Good question and relevant. And I certainly try to help as many planning students as I can, both current students and recent graduates in terms of networking. So this might be a question that Sean might want to weigh into as well in terms of the Toronto market. But I think it's fairly robust for planners. Some of the planning consulting firms that we work with are definitely hiring. There's still market demand for Toronto, and there's a number of sectors in Toronto that are doing quite well. My wife, for example, works for a software development company, and she was employee number 25, and they're now close to 100, and that's over 5 years. And they're located in downtown Toronto in a brick and beam building. Of course, they're all working from home. So that's a Toronto success story, but with success comes challenges, and the sites are certainly becoming more complex. And as Sean well knows, there are certain aspects of the city where it can be quite restrictive, or many layers that you have to navigate. So planning consulting firms need good planners. And on the public side, the city of Toronto is also trying to keep up with demand and is posting fairly regularly in terms of positions they need. So there's many great firms out there. There's many great opportunities on the public side, and for planning students or people who are in jobs and looking to transition to other jobs, there are certainly opportunities out there. So just keep networking and attending events like this and reaching out to people in the industry, and good things will happen.
So Daisy, you mentioned that basically this job was created for you. So how did you do that?
Yeah, so networking honestly is huge. It was word of mouth, but I think the two things are not being afraid to tell people what you're looking for or what your interests are, because word gets around. And then also just go, like you said, go to events, go to planning commission meetings, go to places where things are happening, and people will notice you. And so moving to this small community, I didn't have a job lined up. My husband got a job out here right out of law school. And so we just kind of were like, okay, well, I guess we're doing that then. And so we moved out here. It was like 6 hours away from our family. And we just kind of took the leap, and I started just getting involved wherever I could. And then eventually, so the city manager had heard from someone else that I was looking for, or that had a degree in planning, even though I wasn't like actively seeking a job, and actually contacted me and said, hey, like, I think we could make a position for you. You know, what are you interested in? What's your background like? And so I was just really upfront and told him, like, I don't have as much practical experience to feel comfortable being the only planner. And that was initially, I almost didn't want to take the job because I didn't want to I don't want to bite off more than I could chew, but I got a lot of great outside guidance, and we have an awesome contract planner with the city that we contract with that's given us a lot of guidance every step of the way, and just not being afraid to say, like, I don't know how to do that, or can I get more guidance in this area? And so I feel like, yeah, like you said, the job was created for me. We had never had a planner in our city before. And so I think that I've been able to add a lot of value in, not just because of my education, but because I'm willing to put myself out there and say, like, you know, I don't know how to do this, but I think it's important, or I think we need to get an outside perspective on this, or, you know, whatever it is that's catching the attention of the public or the residents, that we can bring that and say, how do we solve this problem, rather than just trying to be the person that knows the most in the room. So yeah, I'm very grateful for this job, and it's been just an incredible learning experience.
It sounds incredible. Jade, so graduating into a pandemic isn't the most ideal situation. How has the job search been for you and your classmates?
It's been rough. I was lacking in experience. I never got to have an internship or any sort of experience before being hired into my actual graduate full-time job right now. So being hired at all was a surprise to me, because I thought I needed experience and I felt very inexperienced in the interview. But luckily my employers were very lovely, and they understood, they wanted my position. And there is kind of a culture shock going into a new job straight out of college. You're not going to know everything, you learn on the job. So it's been fine so far, but the job market is improving, I think, definitely.
Fantastic. Senator Lee, how is the job market for urban planners in Hawaii?
Hawaii's kind of in a great spot, because for a long time we haven't had a bunch of sort of forward-thinking urban planning going on. So a lot of our departments, for example, at the state level that guide a lot of the projects and in our counties are stacked with engineers. And engineers are fantastic, but when you do projects in isolation, often you don't get the intended overall result. So we're looking to sort of transform the way that we're doing a lot of stuff here and hoping to get a lot more infusion of folks who have experience outside Hawaii so that we can bring lessons from other places here. And we're just, I think, at the forefront of seeing a lot of that happen. So I would expect once we get out of COVID and everything normalizes again, there'll be pretty great prospects.
Just for everyone's sake, I did search up jobs, urban planning jobs in Hawaii to see what was available. There seemed to be a bunch. So if anyone's tempted to move to Hawaii, please let me know. So,
and as Canadians, getting a visa to work in the United States as a planner, it's really easy thanks to the North American Free Trade Agreement. I did that for 6 years, as I mentioned, and it's very straightforward and very easy once you have the job offer. The visa is, you applied for the visa on your way to the job at the border. Very simple. Coming back to Canada can be a bit of a challenge though. At least in Ontario, Ontario employers really give very little credit to non-Ontario experience in my direct experience and from what I've heard from others. And this has been the case for a very long time. A lot of employers here in planning think that somehow Ontario is unique in how we do things, and we really aren't, or not in ways that you can't learn. And so it can be coming home could be the challenge. I mean, assuming that you would even want to come home from a place like Hawaii, like I don't know why that would happen, but if it did,
I missed the cold.
It could be challenging. Sorry that you missed the cold. Yeah, if you like seasons a lot, like it's not like me. Like I was in Florida. Florida's a terrible place. It's very easy to come home from Florida. But except for finding the job part, that was exceedingly difficult.
Good to know. Sean, what did you do in Florida? What was your position there?
So I started as just a junior planner in a small urban planning consultancy, and so I was doing everything. Any project that we would be working on, I would be working on it. I would be doing GI. This was in 1998. And so we were infancy of the internet and infancy in planning at least, and bringing GIS to the firm to some extent. And I would do anything from doing research and running around the state, taking site photos and doing site visits and writing planning reports for other people to sign. And I worked my way up in 6 years to a senior planner, where I was representing clients at hearings and things like that. Pretty much the whole gamut of a private sector planner would typically do. Stuff I still do today.
Okay, so I want to get into more specific projects that you're all working on. Sean, I'm going to go back to you. You're an advocate and you're very vocal about the missing middle. Can you tell us what that is and why it's important for us to know about it?
Sure. So one of the things I yell a lot on Twitter about is the exclusionary zoning that is common in North American cities, including Toronto and all across the US, where basically for most of our urban areas in the low-rise residential areas, the only thing that you can do is a single detached house, a single family house, as they call it in the States. And I don't like that. I don't like that these neighborhoods are locked in amber like a mosquito from Jurassic Park. And I want them to be able to evolve as neighborhoods evolve and as the needs of people who live in those neighborhoods evolve. Like in a medium-ish size of Toronto, on any residential lot, you can do what's called the missing middle, which is multifamily housing that is compatible in scale with a single detached house, with a single family house. So for example, a triplex or a fourplex or a little walk-up apartment. And so you can there are streets in Toronto where you've got a single family house next to a semi, next to a townhouse, next to a little walk-up apartment, next to another single. And it's just this amazing mix of housing forms and the people who live in those housing forms. And they make really interesting neighborhoods and I think the best neighborhoods, because they're as people's needs change, the housing can change with it. And so I advocate for that a lot. We're starting to see some change in Toronto in that front. And I also work on a lot of those types of projects. My yelling on Twitter is basically my marketing budget, and people who want to develop those kinds of projects find me somehow, and they're like, "Hey, Sean, can you help us with this?" I'm like, "Yeah, no problem. It's going to be a nightmare, but I can help you with it."
Okay, in a bit, I do want you to talk about your constant battle with policy and the city, but we'll get to that later. Chris, can you tell me about a project that you've been working on, or your favorite project that you've worked on in the past?
So hard to choose, but I'll try. And it won't surprise you that there's a transit connection, and it's somewhat similar to what Sean said, a bit of a different scale. This is around a 20-story building at a key intersection in Toronto, Yonge and Eglinton. So there's an existing subway line on Yonge Street, but there's a new LRT coming on Eglinton. So you have this great nexus of north, south, east, west transit. And although it is market rental, so it's not affordable rental, it is market rental, it's just a great place to address something that, you know, my wife and I have experienced, which is trying to rent in Toronto, which is a fast growing city where, you know, before COVID, we were seeing quite steep increases in rent. So the fact that our client wanted to provide this right from the onset, not as condominium, and we obviously work on condominium projects, but that it was market rental, it was in a great neighborhood, it's near transit that's under construction, that'll open in 2022, and I will be there on the first train, is really exciting. And part of the excitement was in speaking with city staff, pleading with them, begging with them, Sean knows this well, to say, this is the perfect example of good urban planning in the city. Please pick up, please read my email, please give me my engineering comments, please do everything you can to move this project forward, because the financing and the economics for doing a market rental project are very different than a condominium project. And so we want our clients to succeed, but the mission is to provide more good housing in the city of Toronto, and something that I would live in. So when I can place myself and my wife, or maybe my aging parents or my younger brother in that place, it's very motivating to politely remind the planners, maybe on a weekly basis, please give me my engineering comments. Like, we've got to get shovels in the ground on this. And, you know, obviously pre-COVID, when you're seeing market rent increase quite substantially, you're motivated to try and provide more supply. So that was an example. It's the specific address is 71 Redpath, so you can look it up on the City of Toronto's website. You'll find it pretty quickly. You'll see the planning rationale report by Belfield. You'll see all the consultant reports. And if you're a student, it's a great opportunity to check out development applications, to look at the names of the consultants that are contributing to it, the team, but also get a handle. What are city staff saying? What is the consultant saying? And just get familiar with those reports and try to read them and check it out, because it's a great networking experience, but it's also a great way to familiarize yourself with what happens in real world planning outside of just the academic side, which is school, which is important, but it's good to have that real world content as well.
And Senator Lee, you're on the Senate Transportation Committee. Can you tell us more about that? What projects are you guys working on, and how will that affect Hawaii's future?
Sure. So yeah, I'm taking over the chairmanship of the Senate Transportation Committee. So we have really two roles. One is the broad strokes policy for planning, development, zoning, transit, all of that. And then secondly, we do fund a lot of our public projects or public-private partnerships and those things. So we are, especially right now where we're hopefully going to be getting a new infusion of infrastructure capital in the United States, we'll be able to put out billions of dollars in new projects over the next couple of years. And we've already got several billion in the pipe that have been somewhat held up because of COVID, but it's everything from highways, streets, bike networks, our airports, all of it. We're at a point where they're all overdue for complete overhaul. So on the policy side, we've got a massive overhaul that we're working on for how we're going to allow planning and transit and all of that to proceed. And then secondly, we've got the funding to be able to start a lot of those projects and just put it right out the gate in the next year or two. So all of those are on the table right now. And hopefully in about a week or two, once the legislature wraps, we'll have it all in law and then budgeted.
Sounds awesome. I want to talk about education really quick. Daisy, knowing what you know now about your job, you're a couple years in, I believe. How did school help you prepare, and what would you have changed about your education?
Yeah, definitely. So I started out with my master's degree with the intention, or sorry, my bachelor's degree with the intention of doing a public policy route, and then ended up switching to a planning track. And in doing so, I think it gave me both a broader perspective, but also limited the amount of practical experience that I got in planning specifically. So I really appreciate and value the amount of kind of theoretical planning education that I received when I was getting my bachelor's degree, but definitely don't feel like the practical hands-on like implementation aspect of it was there to the extent that I would have wanted it to be. So in saying that, I would have definitely pursued more internships, because because I was working my way through college and I didn't have any assistance in paying my bills. I didn't really have the time to have an internship, and so I didn't really look to apply there, because I didn't feel like I had I could stretch myself to do that. And so in retrospect, if I could have, I would have prioritized that. And if I had the time, but also like like Sean had said, and like we've been saying, definitely attending meetings, attending like planning commission and other types of planning meetings would have been very valuable, just to see the implementation of planning in action. So seeing what those processes really look like, not just for the networking experience, but just to hear the terminology, hearing like how these things are being talked about and what is important to the people who are making decisions. So I think that would be the number one thing I would have done differently in college, would be going to as many planning commission meetings on a county, city, and like regional level. They're much more accessible now because of COVID, because they're all virtual pretty much. But even back then, like if I could go back and tell myself one thing, it would be go to more planning or any planning commission meetings, because that's how you see how the sausage is made. So that's what I would change.
Great advice. Sean, what's your take on needing a master's in today's job market?
I hate it. I legitimately hate the credentializing of the profession. Like I have a bachelor's degree. It's a 4-year planning bachelor's degree, and that's fine. In my experience, I've used almost nothing from planning school. And everything that I've learned about being a planner, almost, I've learned on the job and from peers and from doing but unfortunately, as I understand it these days, a master's degree, I don't know if it's mandatory, but it's certainly strongly encouraged. And I find that really disappointing, frankly. Like if it wasn't for the fact that you might need it for a job, you don't need it. Like, I really don't see it being necessary for the actual day-to-day function of an urban planner. You'll learn that on the job, unfortunately. But the profession seems to be having a different opinion on that. It's just one that I strongly disagree with.
Would anyone else still like to add to that answer? Nope. Okay. Okay, what urban planning problem would you like to solve if policy and money weren't an issue? I'm going to leave it open. Anyone can chime in. Okay, Chris, I'm going to pick on you.
Okay, well, I'm going to multitask. I'm going to think about my answer. Well, I just want to mention, first of all, Kimberly hasn't been thanked yet, but I want to thank Kimberly because this is awesome. And Ryerson is very lucky to have her as an incoming student in September 2021. And I have to say, because my mother told me to say this to the senator, that my parents did their honeymoon in Hawaii in 1980 and they loved it. So she's been encouraging my wife and I to visit Hawaii. So we will certainly do that after COVID. So it's great to virtually meet you. So I have to listen to Mother, and I just had to mention that.
Let me know, I'll look you up.
Thank you. I think it would be great to transit-oriented communities and transit-oriented development has really become kind of a hot topic lately, mostly because of our provincial, state government, which is encouraging that to happen. And it would be really interesting to see how it could happen faster and also in a way to address some of the missing middle aspects that Sean spoke about, so that there's a good range of housing. Because there's so many development opportunity sites along future transit routes. So I'm thinking for those in Toronto along Kingston Road, for example. So there's an LRT. It's a line on the map, and it doesn't have funding yet, but it's just a great route and has many great sites. So it would be great to see not only best practices from around North America, but also, just see that come to fruition even faster. I know the provincial government is trying. I know Metrolinx is trying. I know there's an interest from the development community or from city councilors, but I'm anxious. I just want to see it happen even faster. And maybe not just North American examples. I want to give a shout out to Dublin, Ireland, because my wife and I had a lovely trip to Dublin, Ireland, and very much enjoyed riding the LRT there. I geeked out, of course, on it. I even did a video while I was on the LRT saying how much I enjoyed the LRT, because I wanted to play that video in an LRT debate in Brampton. So, look at some of the things that Ireland is doing, and Dublin, I would say. There's international examples in terms of transit-oriented development, transit-oriented communities, however you call it. So if I had to pick one thing, I'm going to focus on that, but I have a long list. So I'm going to stop myself there.
Sure. Okay, Senator Lee, what are some planning initiatives you would like to implement in your career, whether in the short or long term, and how can urban planners help you with that?
Yeah, I think, and this is, I think, piling on to what Chris was just saying, because for us, in your last question, we're in a fortunate place where we control policy and money, so they're both not problems. The problem is we don't have planners with requisite background making these decisions for us or helping us make decisions, right? We're all, and this is across Canada and the US, elected office is like a cornucopia of random people off the street who get elected, who are then charged with making these incredible decisions that are going to affect the way everything works. And if you don't have that kind of background, you end up with decisions that just don't make sense. So unless you have folks also in the policy realm with urban planning background, I think this is what we're starting to see, and that's why this is so fantastic an opportunity for everybody. The policy realm, government, all of that needs planners more than the private sector, I'd argue, because that's really where the decisions are going to be made. And it's less about what would we like to do, but rather we have the ability to do all this stuff. We just don't know what to do. So a lot of the things that I've been focused on have come from my own limited background when I was working in design and architecture and all of that, or well, in school for it. And then also from watching YouTube videos online and reading books and being on Reddit and seeing what other places are doing. I mean, this is like, the window through which I've tried to reach out to find other experts, both here in Hawaii and elsewhere, who can help inform what we're trying to do. So I think it leads us into what we're really trying to work on. And I forget the last part of your question. I'm so sorry. Was it what project specifically?
Yes.
So I'll give you two. We want to create what is truly a walkable urban city where biking and walking is sort of the paramount, first and foremost, cheap, easy, clean form of transportation for everybody. And then secondly, build everything else around that. That's one thing. And then secondly, our airports are dismal, and the zoning and everything else around them has a lot of potential. So we're in the middle of tweaking several $1 billion in projects that were supposed to be coming in the next couple of years to rethink it, both in light of COVID, but also how we rethink of this is not just an A to B tool, but rather how do we incorporate everything else into it so it's a functional, awesome place that people actually want to be.
Amazing. Okay, so
And
this is
Senator, I think you'll be getting probably some help from Transportation Secretary Buttigieg on those goals. Sounds like
I knew him back before he was the Transportation Secretary. So he's
cool.
I think I last saw him in the green room at that Chelsea Handler show, and he had a good talk about. I'm excited that he's there.
Yeah, he looks like he's going to be a good fit for the job.
Thank you. Okay, that leads me into last couple of questions before I transition to Q&A. Just a reminder, I think I've seen a few people ask questions in the chat box. It's going to be hard to keep track of questions and comments. If you could keep your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So a common statement I've seen in the planning industry from veteran planners and new planners, and again, we often butt head to heads with policy. So I want anyone to jump in on their opinion on this statement. Do you agree or disagree? If you truly want to make a difference, don't get into planning, get into politics. I'll have the senator answer that in a second. He knows that I've had the statement. Chris, please go ahead.
Sorry, Senator Lee or?
Chris Drew.
Oh, Chris Drew. Okay. It's a great name. You know, I think there's an opportunity in life to do both. So I'm going to hedge myself and say you do both. And maybe I'll do this through two examples of people who are planners who are now politicians. And if you don't know them, and if you're not following them, I like them. I'm biased. I think they're doing good things. Sean will, I think, know one of the two names. Councillor Brad Bradford, recently elected, progressive, has some pretty epic planning battles and interesting things happening in his ward. He was formerly at the firm Dialogue, which is a North American-wide firm. And so for planning students, definitely check out Dialogue as a good place to pitch yourself to work or network to. So you can look him up, follow him on all the socials. And the reason I mention him is because he has been very generous with his time. He's a passionate cyclist, so he's had major cycling discussions in his ward, but also very recently modular housing, which is a very hot topic to address affordability. And so he led a public meeting that had hundreds of people attending online. He got thousands and thousands of emails. So he's leveraging his planning background to explain and communicate and listen to the community in terms of putting in modular housing on a parking lot in an area with community, longstanding community, not only residents, but community spaces. So I just wanted to highlight that as an example of how you can really try to do both in different time periods of your career. And if you're so inclined to run for public office like the senator has, I would say go for it. I've met a number of politicians from all parties, and you know, they're trying to make a difference in their own way. And the other person I would mention is a Halifax member of parliament who's a planner. So he's a national, you know, like a US House of Representatives member. And he's been very passionate on a national cycling strategy for Canada and was recently part of an announcement. So definitely he's the member of parliament for Halifax. His name escapes me at the moment. I'll post it in the chat. And I just mentioned that because I'm sure we have many US students. And there's recently been a debate with the Secretary Buttigieg in terms of, is cycling infrastructure? There's this big debate in the US in terms of what is infrastructure. And thankfully the Secretary has made the case that cycling infrastructure, of course, is infrastructure. And so it's just exciting when you see national leaders standing up for national infrastructure projects that are beyond just sprawling highways, massive interchanges, you know, 400 interstate style things. So I think with both of those examples on a national level, there's examples of how planners can make a difference in the public realm. So that's my kind of complex answer to your kind of yes/no question.
I have a perspective on this, and I think that with just like anything, that planning is the implementation arm of many areas of policy. So just like if you're interested in education, you're going to make a bigger difference doing education policy. But if you want to be a teacher, you're going to make a bigger difference on the lives of the individual students you're teaching. Same thing with medical policy or any area of policy. And so as a planner, no, I don't think that I will make as big a difference as I could as a policymaker per se, but I will make a bigger difference on my community. And when you localize it and when you're looking at it as the implementation arm of policy, I think that that's where you get that breakdown of you can make a difference in either arena. You can make a major difference in either arena. But what it comes down to is the foundational change making versus the implementation arm and the localized change making. And so it just depends on what matters to you and what your areas of interest are.
Great points. Senator Lee, would you like to add to that?
Sure. Yeah, I totally agree. You know, there's roles on both sides of that equation, but I do think the one that's undervalued more or looked over perhaps is on the public policy side. And I think in my experience, seeing all the projects either go or no go, often it's not because of the merits of the project and what's physically possible or what the money's there for or not, but rather it is community pushback because politically a particular project hasn't been sold in the right way. And so, you know, that opposition can either delay it indefinitely till it's no longer financially feasible or just stop it altogether. And then secondly, so having that side of it is really important. But secondly, for a great example of how one person in the right place in policy can make a difference, good or bad, you just need to look to Robert Moses in New York City, who was, you know, one guy, but had so much impact on the way that the city developed, both in some positive ways and a lot of negative ways. So um, without that kind of influence and planning, like I'd mentioned before, you're going to get all these resources being spent one way or another on stuff. It's just going to be the wrong stuff. It's going to be the wrong projects. And projects are going to go without the kinds of considerations that we otherwise might have. So I'd argue at least a handful of you out there ought to look also to the public sector. And doesn't necessarily mean to run for office. You know, we have planning departments and boards and commissions that do all kinds of work on stuff and provide influence at each step of the way. If you do end up running for office, that's sort of the where the buck stops in some cases, because that's really where the policy itself is decided, and where for the larger projects like transit projects and rail lines and all that kind of stuff, I mean, you definitely are going to get the funding from that from the either local or state level or provincial governments. So there has to be people in all those places to make it effective.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you. So before I turn it over to Q&A from the audience, I did see one question about software or programs. So what software or tools are you guys using in your job? Andre, could you speak to that?
Yeah, sure. So actually, I work with a lot of GIS softwares, so and especially open source softwares like QGIS, for example. But working with data and working with a lot of data, actually, my work wouldn't be anything without coding. So actually, I do my own tools. I do my own softwares. Actually, I spend most of my time coding and programming. And actually, in our office, we decided that doing our own tools were the best path to be able to achieve what we do there today.
Fantastic. Daisy, what kind of tools do you use in your day-to-day job?
Honestly, the basics of Excel is going to be the biggest. For me, the hugest benefit is just learning Excel. And I just went on and did I took like an intro course in college that was just like a 10-day course. And then I just feel like if you really know Excel well, that's just hugely beneficial. And then as far as I do, because I often am like presenting to the city council or to the planning commission, having some design background in order to just be able to put together like a PowerPoint or put together a graphic to show them, being able to take data and make it visually appealing is also a huge skill that I would recommend honing in on.
Okay, great. So I'm going to turn it over to Q&A now. We are a little short on time. With the speaker's permission, would you guys be okay with going a few minutes over time to cover as many questions as we can? Okay, fantastic. All right. Again, I'm taking questions from the Q&A chat box. I can't promise that we'll get through them all, but we'll try our best. So Neil, as a person of color myself who's interested in becoming a planner, is there diversity coming into the field, and how are planners working to bring in Black, Indigenous, person of color residents to the conversation? Would anyone like to speak to that?
Maybe oh, sorry, Senator, I think you're about to say something. Maybe not. While others may think of their answer, just by way of example, I want to give a shout out to a Ryerson graduate, Cheryl Case. She co-wrote the book that Sean was also in. and she's done a lot of work on equity and planning for Black communities, and also the history and issue of racism in planning. So she's on Twitter. You can follow her, Cheryl Case, and she's an urban designer with the city of Brampton, where I grew up. And as part of a broader research initiative, and I'll post the link, they just, a group just did, I think it was a Black Planners Toronto group, just did a fascinating study of an area in Toronto called Eglinton West, or Little Jamaica, where there's a major Eglinton Crosstown transit line going through, and there has been concern about disruptions in the community and how to retain that community character, and obviously all the small and independent businesses. So I'll post that link, but I just wanted to give that shout out in terms of people who are trying to, who are and continue to be leaders in the community. So I'll post that link in the chat.
Yeah, I'll follow up on that and just say, I think it's critical that we have people of color and of all various minority statuses everywhere in planning, because I mean, there are infinite number of case studies in the past, like Seneca Village, which was a small, predominantly Black community in New York City, which is now where Central Park is. And, it just built right over it, and who cares? Because they weren't represented in that discussion. Similarly today, there are infrastructure rollouts going on as we speak, which may not be like overtly racially targeted, but wealthier, at least in the United States, wealthier, whiter communities tend to have higher incidences of sidewalks, bike lanes, basic infrastructure that makes commuting outside of a car easier and safer. And so you see, as a result, higher rates of fatalities and injuries in communities that tend to be disadvantaged. And so we need to really flip that script and invest where things need to be invested in. And it takes, I think, a perspective from different communities to be able to do that. And if you're not represented in that decision making, it's just not going to happen. So I'd say it's absolutely critical.
Thank you, Senator. Would anyone else like to add to that before we move on to the next question? Okay, great. David asks, Senator Lee, Hawaii has done the best in management of COVID-19 in the US. Congrats. That being said, Native Hawaiians have been trying to build affordable housing on their homelands for years in downtown Honolulu. They've been denied while Yes in My Backyard developers have been allowed to build multi-million-dollar luxury developments and push for open space at the price of Native Hawaiians. What's your take on this?
Yeah, it's a huge issue, and we could go all day on this thing, but I'm not gonna get too much in the weeds for people. But suffice it to say, we have infinite demand for people coming here and wanting to buy and build stuff, especially find housing, and obviously limited land. So it's created a real terror, and the folks who have money tend not to be the Native Hawaiian community, who have historically been disadvantaged. So trying to figure out how to address that issue is an ongoing topic of conversation right now this year, where we're looking at a couple different law changes that would both help and or hurt that effort. So I'd say I think this is the case, not just here in Hawaii, but in many communities where you do have Indigenous communities or First Nations or other things where there's conflicts over resources and who controls what.
Definitely. To the planners in North America, what have you learned from Europe? And to the planners in Europe, what have you learned from North America? I'll open it up to anyone to add to this.
One of the things that I think we could learn better from Europe is how to do medium density residential and the medium density neighborhoods a lot better, and a lot more, to spread them more widely into our community. Like Toronto and North America in general has sort of the tall and sprawl model. You've got the really tall buildings concentrated in a small number of areas, and then a whole lot of single family houses everywhere else, basically. And we don't have a lot of the, like this sort of the Sweden style or Berlin style of nice, really good, walkable, livable, medium density areas that, like not everybody needs a yard or wants a yard. But if you have a little community yard and community areas, that's kind of great. I think we could learn a lot from how non-North American cities, not only Europe, but also South America and Africa, how they're doing medium density really, really successfully, and really change how we approach our city building.
Jade or Andre, would you have any input on what you would like to see in European cities that you've learned from North America?
So actually, I've never been to North America actually, but it's pretty interesting that how actually we did a project here in Barcelona called Arturo. It was a project in Madrid that we tried to do. It's some kind of old-fashioned urban planning contest, but we tried to put Jane Jacobs aspects into numbers, into data. So speaking about land use mix, for example, and try to put these into data and to try to evaluate that into data, and also the ratio between housing surface and commercial surface into cities that she wrote about American cities. And we tried to apply that here in Madrid. It was actually pretty interesting in the perspective of a research project. But in terms of, let's say, real life project and daily project, I would say that we didn't do a lot more than that.
Okay. All right. Kaylin would love to hear about the experiences of anyone who has worked or collaborated with urban planning advocacy groups or nonprofits that are dedicated to local planning initiatives. Chris, I believe you're in some advocacy groups.
Yeah, I'll be quick because I'm really interested in other people's experiences. So yeah, on my off hours, on my personal time, really enjoy supporting groups, whether it's people doing cycling advocacy or trans advocacy. And it's just a great way to give back, to sharpen my skills as a planner in terms of my 9-to-5 job, stay in touch with issues, and a chance to check out different communities and understand what's happening in those communities. So I would encourage people, if they're in the practice or if they're a student, once they're in the profession, to on your off hours figure out ways to give back, time permitting, because we're all busy and have to take care of ourselves. But it's been a wonderful experience. I could go on at length about it. Maybe I'll post some links. And I can't resist, just in terms of the last question about things that North America could learn from Europe, and I want to mention Ireland again because I was there and I loved it, was, and I didn't know this because I'd never been there, but in Dublin, parts of their commuter rail is electrified, which is amazing. I mean, Dublin is just doing that and is expanding. And I believe they're even trying to electrify the line between Dublin and Belfast, which I took the train. And so I think that's something from Europe that we just have to try and do even more of in North America, of electrifying our commuter rail system, because you can feel the acceleration when you're on it. And it's just wonderful. The efficiency, the frequency is just really exciting. I'll post a link for our region's attempt to do it. And it's a lot cheaper if you do it over many, many years, as opposed to just starting to do it once. So we've got a lot of catch up to do with Europe on electrifying our transit system. But once we take that big step, it's easier to build on it incrementally. The US has some examples, and there's one example in Canada that's under construction, but we need to be more like Dublin in that regard.
Okay. Is anyone else in volunteering or with local planning initiatives that you'd like to talk about?
I'll just chime in and say that a lot of those organizations that aren't coming in necessarily with a specific project, but getting involved in policy and decision making and general planning, and also supporting specific projects as they come up along the way, are a great place to interface with decision makers. And the few that we have in the US that kind of regularly do that, some of the building councils and other sorts of folks, play an invaluable role. And it's a great place to connect. And then, of course, you get to build relationships with policymakers. And when your project comes up or you got an idea to pitch, you know who to call. So I definitely support more involvement there.
Okay. Rutger asks, what cities or countries do you think are great examples of urban planning done right, and why? I'll let anyone chime in on this? Okay, Chris.
Well, maybe I'll defer over to Jade because I was only able to see Dublin or Andrea, and I've never been to Barcelona. But I should say in Toronto, Barcelona is held up as this magical, mythical city in terms of how fast you've been able to build transit. And obviously there's some key differences, like everything from soil to construction. So you can't necessarily do an easy apples to apples comparison between Toronto and Barcelona. But unfortunately, because I've spent so little time in Europe, I'd be very interested in, from Jade and Andre, if there's any examples in your areas of stuff you've seen.
Yeah, in Ireland, we look towards more Scandinavian, the Nordic countries like Copenhagen, Amsterdam. They're all very walkable cities, and they focus really much on biking and sustainable transport. And railway systems is great as well. Just more walkable cities, trying to implant more compact and high residential density in cities, so people are more able to walk around. And I know in Ireland, we actually look towards Barcelona for their more walkable city urban planning design for their blocks, I think. If Andre is able to answer on that.
So yeah, actually Barcelona is a pretty walkable city, actually, in terms of planning Barcelona. But for me, it's difficult to say because actually Barcelona is a small city. I mean, from the east side to the west side, you can do it like in 7 kilometers. So at least in my perspective, from Brazilian cities, this is a quite small city. So, but actually it's pretty walkable. The problem here in Barcelona is that during this, let's say this walkable city, you deal with a lot of unequal places. So super well designed places, super well developed places, and places that are, let's say, more put aside of the public policy and deals more with problems with related to I don't know, to crime, related to poverty, related to other urban problems. So in terms of livable city, Barcelona is a pretty livable city, but actually, of course, we have to deal with a lot of urban conflicts, also with a lot of everything that's related to a big metropolis, no, in the center of Europe.
Okay, Senator Lee, are there any areas in Hawaii where you would say that the urban planning is done right? And could you give us an example?
No. we are a canvas ripe for being redone. But I think, it's great because we have the right weather for year-round outdoor commuting. So we are in some communities putting in networks of protected bike infrastructure and redoing zoning and all kinds of stuff around transit-oriented development, specifically to try and account for this. So I think come back and ask me again in 5 years, and we will have, I think, a lot to say. But I think there are definitely examples, in Europe and some of the other places people are talking about that we are looking to try and replicate and take advantage of. Because if you can do it when it's winter outside and there's ice on the ground, then you can certainly do it here.
Fantastic. Okay. Vandana asks, how can students get involved in urban planning projects here in Canada? I think this is relevant for not just Canada, but all over the world. And what are some of the forums / courses / firms that we should look into to get started? Daisy and others had already touched upon this, but really just get involved and join community meetings, listen in. That's where you can learn about just really the meat of your local urban planning laws and local counselors. Does anyone else have anything to add into what you should look into or where you should be involved to learn more about urban planning?
No, but that really is important. Just read the basic policy and planning documents that apply in the area that you want to work in. Read the official plan, read the provincial policy statement and the growth plan, and read staff planning reports. And especially because everything is virtual now, watch planning and housing committee meetings and community council meetings and committee of adjustment meetings, and see how it's done. See how the sort of the meat and potatoes of planning is actually done. Get engaged in if there's a local planning initiative, a guideline study, or a new official plan amendment or rezoning study, get engaged and go to those meetings. It's a bit harder to go and network at those meetings virtually. Like, it sucks that if you're a new grad and this is what you're coming into, networking is really hard. It was never easy for a lot of people, and for most people. I sucked at it. But it's really, it's so much more difficult now. Hopefully in the after times, whenever those emerge, we'll go back to the young planner meet and mingle events that OPPI used to put on. I hired a planner from attending one of those. But yeah, like, just be engaged. Like, if like, I very rarely have an opportunity to hire somebody, but when I do, I know that they're not going to know anything about how anything is done. Like, that's fine. You're going to learn on the job. And that's part of my job as your employer, to teach you how to do the stuff that I need you to know how to do. You don't know how to do that stuff, and that's totally fine with me. But it's definitely a leg up if you can tell me what a zoning bylaw is. And it's definitely a leg down if you can't. So, you know, you don't necessarily have to, like, I'm not expecting you to know what everything means, but have an idea as to where you might find some information. And typically, like, typical stuff that goes into, you know, a planning report, or, you know, how to find, how to find the zoning bylaw online, things like that. Like, think basic stuff. And that will get you definitely a leg up, because surprisingly not everybody is doing that stuff.
So Kimberly, if I could add to that, because it's a great question. So for planning students, wherever you're located, you know, check out what some of your student associations or alumni associations are doing in terms of events and programming, and try to attend those. So at the Ryerson Planning Alumni Association, we try to be welcoming and inclusive to students, or to anyone really, to participate and join us and network with us. And we try to provide programming to encourage students to do workshops with us or bike tours. So the other thing is that if you don't see an event or a networking opportunity, create your own. Follow the Kimberly Lamb model of getting people together. And here we all are. This is amazing. There's 72 attendees on a Sunday. This is fantastic. And it doesn't mean it's not a numbers competition, but there's lots of different ways that you already have a lot of lived experience, knowledge of your neighborhood, passion. So you don't necessarily have to wait for an event or a thing to be engaged in the planning conversation. And the other thing I would say is look up who your local city planner is, and have a virtual coffee conversation with them. So although I work in the private sector and with obviously a lot of private sector consultants, there are some wonderful public servants at the City of Toronto trying to do good work, sometimes, you know, pushing that boulder uphill, who are wonderful people who have been mentors and friends to me and have been extremely generous with their time. And so I posted 2 links earlier in the chat. I can post them again, of City of Toronto resources in terms of upcoming planning meetings and area studies. But I just wanted to highlight that, you know, have a conversation with who your city planner is and ask them what they're up to and what they're doing. And the other thing I could mention is the Urban Land Institute, which is a North American organization. And if you're a student, I think they have a discounted rate for students, and they often will hold events. Doesn't mean you have to go to every event they have, but that's just another organization for additional networking. Very focused on sometimes land use planning, but I know in the Toronto chapter, although Toronto is in their name, they recently held a very interesting event in my hometown of Brampton. There's actually a planning student from Brampton who's on the chat here, or one of the attendees. So that's just another tip, and I'll post those links again, but lots of different ways to get involved. And I should mention that Mike Collins-Williams from the West End Home Builders Association, I posted his link. He's very generous with his time. So if you're a planning student, look him up. We did a really kind of a mini event called Planners on Bikes, and we just biked through the city of Hamilton along a future LRT route to see what are the opportunities, what's happening, what are some changes in these neighborhoods that will take place, how do you protect and include affordable housing to make sure things are equitable. So when it's safe to do so in terms of COVID restrictions, walking tours and biking tours are fantastic ways to explore neighborhoods. You don't need a lot of people. It could be 3 of your friends, or maybe invite your one of your professors, for example. There's a Ryerson professor. I posted her link on there, and she's very generous with her time. So there's lots of different people you can invite to create your events and replicate the great work of Kimberly Lamb.
I'd also say keep in touch with your classmates. Like that is important. Your classmates, even if you're not the first to get a job, somebody in your class is going to, and they may hear of opportunities where they're working or at people they're working with. So keep that network going. When I was having a really hard time getting a job in Ontario to move home from the forgotten hellscape that is Florida, I got a job. I went from a senior planner job in Florida and I had no experience in Ontario. So I called up one of my classmates, and I was able to get a junior planner job at the firm she was working in, you know, well below my experience level, but a job's a job and work is good. And so she was able to help me out. And that networking is extremely important. Not only networking with, you know, people who are in the profession for longer than you, but people who are at, you know, in your class. Like they have opportunities that you might not know about. Keep that, you know, your WhatsApp chat group or whatever the kids do these days. I don't know, I'm old. And so like keep that going and, you know, network.
Also, I will add to, like I mentioned before, my job didn't exist before I moved out here. And I think being open to just talking to people about what are the needs that I can meet, what are the things that, what are you looking for, especially in small towns and especially in rural areas, to say, what are the needs and how can I meet them? And then a lot of times opportunities can come from that. And I also want to add to what Sean said. Yes, there are a lot of detriments to COVID and everything being virtual, and it really does suck for networking. But it also opens up an opportunity that didn't exist before, as much that if you, for example, if you live in Toronto and you want to get a job in Honolulu, you can like join their planning commission meetings. You can join all their meetings online virtually from 1,000 miles away. And that gives you the opportunity to explore, you know, is this something I'm interested in? And what does it look like? What does planning in Hawaii look like different than what planning in Toronto looks like? And so because everything is virtual, there's more opportunities for us to engage in those type of opportunities internationally even.
That's huge. That really is. Being able to watch a planning committee meeting or something in a place that I was interested in working, like that's a huge opportunity that never would have, like clearly didn't exist when I was first getting into the job market. Like that's a big benefit, and use it. Definitely use it.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Oh, Senator Lee, did you have something to add?
Oh, I was just going to say, especially for folks who are still students and looking for ways to plug in while they're still in school, there are internships available in all kinds of different places. And on the public sector side, within different departments, and certainly within elected leaders' offices up and down the spectrum. And doing something like that opens doors in ways that you probably don't realize, not only meeting on the public side of the equation with those folks, but being able to transfer that back into job applications for the private sector, where you have somebody who understands how the political process works, understands how community works, and is able to build that into all these project considerations so you have a more successful product. And that's something that, you know, you can't get out of a textbook.
Local counselor's office is a really, really good example. Another unusual one is law firms, planning law firms. You know, Chris works at one. I did a 2-year stint at a big downtown Toronto law firm, and it was probably the best job that I've had in terms of learning planning. There are non-traditional planning jobs out there, and sometimes there are jobs that don't exist, and you know, like Daisy said, that can be created for you if you can, you know, somehow pitch the right person and be creative in thinking, I'm a planner. This is what I can bring to your organization, municipality, or or company that could really benefit them. And if it's the right workplace that is open to that, I think you could make your own job, frankly.
And I'll just throw in and say that airport project I talked about earlier, where we're rethinking the $2.5 billion in upgrades that we're looking at through a different lens, was actually inspired by an intern I had about 3 or 4 years ago who worked in my office, who was an urban planner, an architect, and did sort of a conceptual, like, what will we like to see in the future? And here we are a few years later now, and it's the basis for what we're going to try to rethink and imagine. So you definitely have an impact.
I love that. Thank you for including that. All right, so I'm going to end this up with one more question. Tell me about your favorite book, podcast, author, something to do with urban planning that our wonderful guests can look up and read more about. I know Sean is going to. Yep. Okay. Go ahead, Sean.
Favorite podcast definitely is 99% Invisible. I'm sure if you're a planning nerd, you probably already listened to it. And the 99% Invisible City, awesome book. Toronto makes a few appearances in it. Super, super fun and interesting look at design and the world around us. Highly recommended.
For me personally, the book that got me interested in urban planning is Happy City by Charles Montgomery. So if you haven't read it, definitely give it a read. It really opened my eyes.
I'll jump in with 2 suggestions, and I'll post the links. I already posted one of the links earlier, but I'll post it again. The book is called Trains, Buses, People. It's by a US author. He's a professor at, I think, Rice University in Texas. He's in Texas. Anyways, he's on Twitter. Fantastic maps of all major US cities with transit, including Honolulu, and a great way of looking at transit from 5 or 6 different principles that cover the full gambit, everything from frequency to equity to density. I'm hoping he's going to do a Canadian version because I'm jealous, or a European version. So I'll post that link, and then I'll post a podcast. They haven't done a podcast. Oh, actually, I just noticed they did one on April 11th, so I'm a little behind. It's called The Next Stop. It's a transit-based podcast by Helen Lee. And they did a fantastic episode recently on the importance of the bus network, like just the regular bus network in terms of providing service, getting people to where they need to go. And if there's anything we've learned from COVID, is that the bus network is the backbone in the city I grew up in. And Sylvia Roberts, who's here, Brampton recorder, has documented this well. The bus ridership has stayed, relatively robust, even with the downturn in because of COVID. The commuter rail system has gone down quite substantially, and that's very much related to the nature of work. So I will post those 2 links, but I also say in terms of podcasts, for students is if you don't see a podcast or if you have ideas, you can create your own. It doesn't have to be polished, doesn't have to be perfect. You can collaborate with some colleagues to get some ideas out there. So I would just put that out there, to never doubt your own experience or your own neighborhoods, and never wait sometimes to be asked or to do something, and feel that confidence to sometimes create your own, and then send it out for feedback to your peers or your networks.
I would say, actually, as a podcast, I would advise a data science podcast. It's called Data Futurology, that invites a lot of data scientists from a lot of different fields. So there are some urban planners, there are data scientists from biology industry, from medical industry. So it's pretty interesting because they talk about their job as data scientists in their own fields. So sometimes there are some pretty interesting ones related to public policies and public urban planning. And the book, I would say, Arrival City from Doug Saunders, that is about immigration and how public policies and how public management deals with. There are like good and bad examples of dealing with immigration, and how this can lead the city into a more inclusive city and a more exclusive city in terms of immigration. it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I just throw in a couple of books: Tactical Urbanism, I think, Street Fight, and pretty much anything by Jeff Speck is pretty good. But also, just going back to Robert Moses and that whole battle, there's a ton of material on that. That's just a great sort of city versus community planner versus engineer and politician. All those things are all rolled into that whole saga from back in the day.
I would recommend, I guess this might be kind of basic, but Happy City and Strong Towns, the podcast. So both of those I think are really great for foundational planning knowledge. And also get on the planning side of TikTok, because there's a lot of really interesting creators that are just putting together interesting content. So that's my recommendation.
So old.
And I would recommend a podcast called Monocle 24's The Urbanist. I think it's quite recent. It's very interesting. For books, I would recommend Jan Gehl's Like Between Buildings. It's really interesting as well.
And Sean was also just waving his book that he's contributed to. Can you tell us more about that book, Sean?
So this is House Divided. My webcam is mirrored. It's a roadmap to doing more of the missing middle type stuff that I like, that small scale multi-residential housing. It's put together by a number of authors, including Ryerson's Cheryl Case and the Globe and Mail's Alex Bezikovic. I'm in here talking about the problem with zoning, because all I yell about is zoning, it seems. But it's really excellent. If it's a good starting point if you want to learn more about missing middle and what the benefits that it can bring to your communities. Yeah, recommended. Also, because I'm in it.
I love it. All right. Okay. I think out of respect for everyone's time, I think we can wrap it up here. I'm so sorry we couldn't get to everyone's questions. A lot of these questions or could be answered in over hours. It's a long conversation, but I hope we were able to cover a lot of the questions that you had. Of course, if you have any strong, urgent follow-up questions, I will be sending out a survey by tomorrow. In this survey, you will also be given the opportunity to subscribe to my mailing list where you'll be notified of future events. You can find most of our speakers on social media. Both Sean and Chris are very vocal on Twitter, I believe. Senator Lee, I think I have you on Instagram. I'm not sure if you're active on any other social media. Jade, Andre, and Daisy, where can our listeners find you?
LinkedIn is best for me.
Yeah,
Yeah,
actually,
LinkedIn.
from me also, I don't have an Instagram, and actually, you can enter on 300,000kms.net, which is the website of the company I work, where you can find some pretty interesting projects. And yep.
Fantastic, thank you. Someone also asked for a list of all the recommended resources that we all talked about. So yes, I will be sending that out later. Again, thank you so much, everyone. I'll be in touch for feedback. Have a great day.
Thanks, Kim. Bye.
Much, Kim.
Thanks.
This was fun.
This is really great, Kimberly. Thanks for setting